today. This is Joe, your host. We also have Kyle and Shane LeMaster here. Shane was a guest last week. We're going to get into some more stuff with him this week. Can't wait. Just a little bit of info about what we have going on, and then we can jump right into the interview. So we have just launched a sales page for our Navigating Psychedelics class. It's kind of a way more inclusive class offering than we were offering before. We're going to have 10 experts give introductions and kind of master classes about the topics they are most expert in with psychedelics, for instance, integration or picking the right ayahuasca center. Plenty of other topics. We'll kind of lay that out as we record them. The class will launch on August 8th. You have maybe a few more weeks for the early bird discount. We're selling that at, what was the number, Kyle? 107?
107, correct.
107 for a few more weeks, and keep an eye on that to take advantage of the deal of getting it early. We're also selling a premium option for $40 more, where you get an hour with either Kyle or I to talk at length about what you have going on, and maybe we can give you some advice. I have a breathwork workshop coming up in Breckenridge, Colorado on July 8th. So feel free to come check that out if you're in the area, or if you want to come from far away. That would be quite flattering. So I think that's it for right now. So you really should listen to the last podcast we did with Shane if you haven't listened to it yet, because we're probably going to be talking at length about stuff we already talked about before at kind of a deeper level. So yeah, check out that last episode before digging into this one. Or if you're really bold, you can jump right in. So Shane is a licensed therapist, does a lot of really interesting work with veterans, is also a martial artist. And what did you call that? Shambhala? Something, Kyle? You mentioned something about warriorship. There's a S word.
Yeah, Shambhala. That's a Buddhist kind of sect of warriorship.
Yeah.
Maybe Shane could
yeah, we'll get into that in a little
describe
bit.
Describe it a little bit better.
Yeah, so I guess here we go, Shane. Let's start talking about it.
Jump in.
Okay. I think if I tried to explain it, I'd probably butcher it pretty badly. But
let's do a lightweight.
Yeah, Shambhala tradition is what I base a lot of my own Buddhist practices and Buddhist. It's what I prefer to study.
Right.
That and most of the Tibetan sects of Buddhism, I just find more in line with my own belief system. And yeah, we were talking a little bit before the podcast about part of my approach in my therapy or in my sport and performance psychology consulting and that sort of training, as well as my work with veterans, is really kind of teaching this lifestyle of warriorship. Joe, you were mentioning, what it's like to be a man in this day and age, and
it's weird,
and things like that. And I think it's really important. A lot of people are lost out there.
There's a lot of people lost, man. Being a guy in this day and age is quite challenging. There's this whole flame war I'm seeing on the internet right now. For a lot of people I know from alternative worlds, and there's just all these little subsects of ideology battling each other. And there's even if it's only 100 people total on the internet, they're all the way self-righteous about who knows what. And how do you negotiate that as a man without feeling beaten up and being able to be yourself and not feel like the whole world is out to get you, which is kind of what the internet is making it feel like right now. It's not really the case, guys. It's just the internet. But how do you negotiate that carefully? And in your day-to-day living, how do you be embodying of what's going on in you? So yeah, it's very complex math and definitely not simple. But yeah, so you help. That's kind of what you're focusing on for your inner work. Do you work with the veterans on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I do. I usually try and keep what I teach them to be non-denominational.
Right. Smart.
So I don't really bring in Buddhist terminology and things like that unless they specifically request it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of these vets, after experiencing the camaraderie and the fellowship and the community that they experience and having a mission and a purpose overseas, and then coming back Again, they feel lost. They feel like a soldier without a mission, like they have no value, no purpose. And then on top of that, all the stigmas that come along with it from the general public can be really difficult for these guys to transition. So a lot of what we do in helping them reintegrate and help them, feel better so that we can reduce that suicide rate is really teaching them, that you can be a warrior in so many other ways. You don't have to be on an actual battlefield, shooting a rifle like you were overseas. You can be a warrior every single day in every aspect of your life. Warriorship goes much deeper and is much broader than that. And that's something I try and live every day is, I try and live that way physically through my martial arts and develop those practical warrior skills, but also, we're mental warriors, we're mind warriors, those are the warriors of the future, are the warriors who can really tap into their mental potentials.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's really awesome. And plus, I remember I took a warriorship class in my undergrad. I kind of just created it and read a bunch of the Shambhala texts and took some Aikido. But the thing that really turned me on to that whole concept was, I think, kind of coming back to being a man too, like how to just be in the world without being violent, but also striving to create a better world. Because Shambhala is all about kind of building the enlightened world in some sense. I remember reading from the book, it had something to do with building this enlightened kind of world. But there's so many different ways to go about it, and going about it in a non-violent way and just showing up however.
Yeah, I feel like that's a theme among a lot of Buddhist traditions, is to strive to give back more than what you take from this world, and what Joe was saying, it's very difficult for men these days to navigate the world with all the pressures in the internet age and all the criticism and all the little clicks and, trends going on. For me personally, I find it's a spiritual practice for me, but also something practical that I use. And I just try and detach myself from, as much as possible, from those criticisms or from those expectations that society has. I feel like I'm pretty good at identifying what my core beliefs are and what the belief systems that were taught to me by churches and parents and the education system, and really detaching from that so that I can fully explore who I am. Buddhists talk a lot about, detaching from this reality because, it's not really real, and discovering your higher self, your deeper self, something that's preconditioning, if you could say that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious for myself, and maybe some other people are listening too. Do you have any texts off the top of your head, books or references for this path of warriorship? Say any Shambhala texts or anything like that, if people want to dive in a little bit more.
I wish I did off the top of my head. I know a couple of book titles. So there's one called On Combat. And I believe the author's name is, he's a lieutenant colonel, if I'm correct, and a retired Lieutenant Colonel Christensen. If you go on Amazon and Google warriorship or warrior mind or anything like that, usually a few good things will come up. Yep. Yeah, sorry, I can't name any off the top of my head.
No worries. I thought maybe you had a little bit more than me. I know the one book that I read was Shambhala, The Path of the Warrior. Mm-hmm. But I think that, it's a really relevant topic, especially in this psychedelic realm of how to show up and then how to move this movement forward and kind of stand ground and fight for what we believe is right. And, these sacred medicines are helping people. And, how do we really fight for that if we believe in it?
Yeah. If I was in the other room, I could just look at my bookshelf and I have a whole section on this, but I'm drawing a blank right now.
No worries.
I know there was a really interesting one called On Killing. I think it was by Christensen.
Yes. That's another one by him that's really good.
Yeah, it's I haven't read it. I've wanted to because some of my vet friends suggested it. Yeah, it's interesting. Did you know Kalindi talks about this from a warrior perspective? Kalindi IE, like that's he's not necessarily doing mental health, but he's doing like this warriorship thing. How do you stay in that self-defense, defended stance, and even at 75 grams or whatever of psilocybin mushrooms? Like I think he doesn't go that high, but I think people he knows and works with go that high, which is insane. But having that martial arts background probably helps. I would love to understand the why behind why they're doing that. I don't know. As a martial artist, can you relate to it?
In Detroit this year, and he is just a fascinating guy. He's so cool, so friendly to talk to. And you're right. He takes a very spiritual and warrior type path with his psychedelics, and the way the things he draws out of ancient history and texts on different warrior clans, Vikings using psychedelics and the Egyptians using it and Native Americans using psychedelics during battle and all these things. It's just so fascinating for me, coming from a martial arts background my whole life, and then also having a love on the side for psychedelics and never really knowing that there was a connection between the two. And then, you hit these synchronicities, and then it just blows your mind every single day.
Yeah.
The one book that I read, maybe Joe, the guy's name off the top of your head. I can't remember. Daniele
Bolelli. We talked about him last time. Yeah. The Italian, now Los Angeles based historian, I think.
Yeah. He had one sentence in this book where he was talking about martial arts and psychedelics. And he's like, what's more psychedelic than an Aikido master knowing the move before it actually happens? And it's true, And maybe that's a good segue into about, your research and your interest in microdosing, flow states, and martial arts. And I know you wanted to jump back a little bit and talk about how you got into all this. And
thanks. Like I said in the last podcast, I've been a martial artist my whole life. I've been an athlete in, numerous sports my whole life, and was never really the best, but always sought to reach those same potentials that I saw, the stars on the team reaching. And I wanted to tap into that myself. So I'd always had an interest in that from a very young age, but I had been using psychedelics recreationally and never really drew the connection between the two until I heard the famous story about the Pirates pitcher Doc Ellis back in the 70s pitching a no-hitter, Major League Baseball no-hitter on LSD. And from what I hear, there's even a rumor out there that Ice Cube is going to make a new movie about Doc Ellis, and I'm so pumped if that's true, because he has really been my inspiration for the research path that I want to pursue. That inspired me to go experiment with my own microdoses in athletics, and right away I found profound results, but found nothing in the literature about enhancing physical and mental performance through the use of psychedelics, like in a direct action type state, where you're doing something for a performance reason. And so I found that was a gap in the research and in the literature, and it was just calling to me, and that's really what got me inspired to want to look into these things, and hopefully do some future research with it. And in university with my formal sports psychology training, we did a lot of studying about flow states, and mostly natural flow states, how people get into them, how athletes experience them, what it means for performance as far as mental and physical enhancement. And, I just want to bring those two things together. I feel like if we can, I hate to use the word market, but if we can market psychedelics to the general population and kind of open their eyes to the potential that lies out there for them with microdoses, I feel like it could open the door for legalization, for at least decriminalization, you know?
Yeah, this is really interesting because microdosing kind of is hitting the scene as that way, and it seems to be gaining more reputation for that. And I think Paul Austin was talking about he believes that's kind of the way in as well, is through microdosing, not having this psychedelic effect, but just taking sub-threshold doses and just experiencing kind of like a flow state or just, you know, a little bit better of a day. It's interesting.
Sure, yeah. And, you know, I listened to Paul Austin's podcast on that recently, and, you know, his and my views are very similar in that we think that because of the sub-perceptual effects, we think it will be more widely accepted by the general public. But I think I tend to take more the route of, again, because of my background, performance. You know, we live in a capitalist society. You know, I understand who my audience is. You know, most Americans want to succeed in life. They want to thrive. They don't just want to survive. They want to perform at their best. We're high achievers. We're a country of perfectionists a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you can play on that a little bit and say, hey, I can help you get closer to your greatest potential. This is how we do it. Then I think a lot of people will be interested in that. I mean, they're already interested in those things. You know, you see the rise in ADHD medications and, you know, natural supplements that help with focus and attention and things like that. Microdoses, though, do so much more on so many more levels. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper. Yeah. Have you guys seen that?
Yes. Trying to think. I think I've seen pieces of it.
Yeah, in the movie, he just takes like a super drug, and it makes him perform everything that he does at greater proficiency. And I truly believe that's what microdosing can do. Maybe not to the level displayed in the movie, but would certainly get some people interested.
Right. I think that's how they're pitching it for sure. They're also like Provigil is kind of already there, but that's kind of meth as opposed to.
Joe, do you have a question before? I thought.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Not sure what the deal is there. So I think Provigil is kind of already there for this kind of thing, but that's more just like speed in a sense, or like it's obviously very structurally different from an amphetamine, but it's kind of that drug, but it's not taking advantage of the whole brain. So like a person that microdosed for 3 months then started using Provigil, that would be an interesting experiment. I think they just banned Provigil in chess tournaments or something because I think they calculated it made you 15 or 30% better, something like that. This was from the Peter Schwarstedt H talk, Kyle. It's interesting that chess would be the place to ban cognitive enhancers first.
Well, this is a question, like, and I was just thinking about this too, is that like, why would we want to ban things that could improve performance? If like you're better at chess, isn't that okay? Like, isn't that pushing the limit to maybe create something new? I don't know. It makes me scratch my head that, you know, they'd be like, no, no performance increase.
Right. Yeah. It's almost, it seems common sense to us. And I think to most people on the street that you talk to, it would seem like common sense too. But I think it probably goes back to what happened in the 60s and 70s with prohibition in the first place. You know, the people in charge don't want a new class of people all of a sudden becoming more intelligent and more proficient at everything and beating them out of those positions, you know. So I think there's a lot of shady stuff still going on behind the scenes. And that's the uphill battle that, you know, all of us are facing right now.
I think there's something about like scientists thinking it's not fair that somebody would do it and the others wouldn't. And there's also the idea of health risks. We're pretty sure microdosing is safe. We don't, 100% know it over like what happens if you do it for 8 years, but we're pretty sure it's a lot safer than, most drugs, I think. It probably actually even fight disease the way I model the brain scan data, because, disease theoretically would be due to low blood flow in certain zones of the brain. And this would just increase metabolism all over the brain for the most part, and hopefully keep your brain fresher for a lot longer. So yeah, it's weird math. I don't exactly know why. And I think it would be interesting too, bringing it to sports, because right now a lot of the stuff about microdosing is how to be a better capitalist. But what about how to be a better athlete or how to be a stronger person? Like that, those aren't really valued 100% in the capitalist model, but it's something that I think is really important to look at. For sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So you had this idea of a study. Like, have you gotten much into like what you want to look at for this stuff?
Yeah. I've given a lot of thought to, as far as, how I may want to structure it, some ideas on how to control some of the variables, but, basically I would like to, take a sport, jiu-jitsu, that I'm most familiar with. And what I would like to do is in a controlled setting, so a gym that's agreed upon by everybody, maybe, that everybody feels comfortable in, conducting microdose trials where, I might have 10 to 20 jiu-jitsu athletes on the mat at a time. Some would be microdosing, some would not be, double-blind placebo study. And we would have them take subjective surveys before, during, and after, as well as, tracking who was actually microdosing and are their subjective experiences matching up. I've talked at length with a lot of my black belt professors, and, I have quite a list of willing research participants, black belts in jiu-jitsu that are really interested in the applications of microdosing and are want to give it a try with me if I can manage to get the funding and a team behind me. So yeah, we would be testing things, and the basis for what I want to test in these sessions is based off of my own anecdotal experience. I've microdosed in both training and competition and experienced some phenomenal results. So things I would be trying to test for, and we have sports psychology tests and sports performance tests that we can run in labs to do this as well. Things like improving eye-hand coordination, improving one's ability to put together a mental strategy on the fly. Things like, time being distorted, where you feel like your opponent is going much, much slower than you, and you feel like you're able to move much, much faster. Anticipating moves 2, 3, 4 moves ahead of what you're normally capable of. Greater tactile sensation. So jiu-jitsu is a very tactile sport. So being able to feel your opponent better, more accurately. I've noticed better balance, better for what it feels like, more strength, more explosive strength, greater capability for endurance, greater capability for muscular endurance, not just cardio endurance. And most importantly for performance, what I think is the clarity of mind that you get while you're microdosing. So you're no longer concerned about your fears of competition, or you're not worried about the crowd. It gives you this laser focus where you step on the mat and you are in the moment from the time you start until the time that you're done. And that's where a lot of athletes get caught up, is up in their mind, and that's what I do with my own private practice. if anyone's interested, they can visit my website. It's www.mind-ops.com. So mindops.com. And that's what I do. I help athletes get over, their mental blocks, help them get out of their own way so that they can be purely in that moment during competition. That's when we reach the flow state most often, is when we are in the moment, not thinking about the past or the future, but really, experiencing the present for all that it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack right there. Kind of want to dig into a little bit about the research, but I'm also kind of curious too, how do you teach flow states to people without doing microdosing in your practice?
So in my general practice, when I'm working with athletes who don't have experience with microdosing, most people in general have had flow states in their life. A lot of times they just don't recognize that that's what's happening. So, you can get in a flow state while you're washing the dishes. If you are totally in it and you are doing nothing but washing the dishes and feeling the temperature of the water, feeling the texture of the plate and the cloth that you're using, you can get in a flow state. You can get in flow states while, just jogging. So a lot of people have been through these flow states. And so what I try and do is I try and help them remember times in their lives where they can remember a flow state. And then we pick apart kind of what were the preceding events and circumstances that led up to that flow state. What was your mindset? What was the setting like? What was it like during? So what were the qualities that we want to try and elicit that are most profound and most remembered by you and remembered by the cells in your body? And then afterwards, what sort of effect, what sort of benefit did you notice afterwards? And then we try, to the best of our ability, try and recreate the pre, during, and post aspects that they can remember and see if that helps them reach a flow state more easily or more quickly. And they'll come back to me and report, I was able to get into it this much faster, but I lost it after 30 seconds. And we can fine tune, the pre-performance routines. We can fine tune, the specific mind state that we want the athlete to be in, that's most efficacious for them as an individual during their performance. And then we can fine tune their personal integration of their training and competition experiences after.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I was trying to think. That's kind of like I had maybe a year and a half of being really into I don't exactly know how to pronounce this dude's name, but one of Oprah's minions, Eckhart Tolle. He did a lot of mindfulness stuff, and it was like kind of repackaged Buddhism in a way, but just that act of being with whatever you're doing, really wash those dishes and feel it, really drink that coffee. It's fascinating that it's all attention based in a way, and figuring out how to train that attention. And yeah, you're right. With sports, you could just kind of make this routine that would tune you in, maybe customized to you. And I think there's huge room for improvement there with any kind of sports group.
Yeah, you can just take a look at any Major League Baseball game and watch the guy who's on deck to bat, and watch what he's doing. And you'll notice that every time he gets on deck or every time he steps up to the plate, he has a specific routine that he does. And it's individualistic. It's individual for each person. And some of it is, superstitious, but superstition plays an important role in how comfortable the person feels in the situation. So some of them have actual performance benefits, like chalking your hands up or something like that, while others are more superstitious and just help with the mental state. And Joe, I think I remembered you saying that you're a snowboarder, right?
Right. Skier, snowboarder, biker, all that stuff. And it's all flow state all the time.
Exactly. So like if you were to come in and into my office and ask me, I need help reaching a flow state in this new sport that I'm trying. I'm just having so much difficulty with it. I may have you recall the flow states that you experienced while snowboarding and experience what that felt like, maybe even put you into, teach you a meditation to bring up some of those same somatic feelings so that you can remember them, and then have you try and apply that same thing to this new sport that you're trying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. It becomes funny when you try to say, okay, this person has been a chef for 18 years. Now they want to learn how to do rally driving. Getting that flow state. It's like, that scenario is probably played out a lot, but getting it more dialed in would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked what you said about getting out of your own way. And I think that's like the biggest trick sometimes. Because I find when I enter into a flow state, I'm completely just not even thinking about anything. And I've completely just removed, because I overthink things all the time. I think I just get lost in my head. I'm like, should I do that? And I go back and forth. And getting out of my own way, I think, is like the biggest block for me. But when I am in that state, I notice I'm just not questioning anything and just feeling every moment, feeling it. Very intuitive too, kind of tapping into that intuition and just feeling it.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's what, even if you're not playing a sport, that's what I feel on microdose. So when I'm microdosing and going about my daily life, running errands, I feel like I'm running my errands extremely efficiently, like I'm picking the shortest line to check out automatically and not having to think about it, or I'm finding the closest parking spot without trying. Someone says something not so nice to me, and it's so much easier to just let that go and keep going about my day. So couple that with a flow state, and who knows what we can achieve as a human vessel, as a human being.
Yeah.
I think the potentials are endless. And in the last podcast, I cited, some stories I've heard of Buddhist monks just achieving amazing, inhuman things through meditation. And I feel like we all can tap into that. We all can experience that. And there's various ways to get there. Microdosing is just one, and it's one that may appeal to a Western audience more so than, here, sit down for 50 years and meditate, and maybe you'll learn some of these skills.
I have this story from being out here in like ski towns where people up here obviously do a lot of drugs. It's just kind of like what ski resort towns are known for in a lot of ways. And so it's kind of a way to preface something risky that I don't really advise people do. Like, I don't want you to break your leg on my account or whatever. But so a really talented skier and his friend decide to take a quarter tab of acid, so about 25 to 50 micrograms of acid at 7 a.m. on a really deep snow day, and proceeded to have the best day of their lives on snow. And to the point where everything was automated, everything was pure flow state. And this is where it becomes not microdose. I think he was actually seeing lines to follow, similar to like a video game. So it was like his so like as a non-specific amplifier of psychic process, your mind kind of, your body or your flow state's kind of just projecting into the LSD where you want to go, in a sense. That's how the way I modeled it, but I'm sure you could model it many other ways. But it's just like fascinating, and that sounds like something, if we get there with flow states, like, a real premium experience, somebody would pay $10,000 for. People pay that much money to go heli skiing, so I'm sure they would pay that much to have the best day of their life on acid skiing. But again, I don't advise it. It sounds super risky. Be really careful if you do that, people. I don't want to be the reason you broke your leg.
Then how would the public react if you were marketing like that and somebody had an accident, and then, maybe they'd blame it on, they were high on drugs,
right. Absolutely.
Right. And I've read a couple different articles from different sources talking about extreme athletes, and in particular extreme snowboarders in the professional snowboard realm. I've been a snowboarder for 15 years of my life too, and so that was a big part of my life as well. And what I read was that just about 70 to 80% of the X Games snowboarders are on some sort of microdose of LSD while they're competing. And I don't know how true that is or not, but the professional snowboarders that I know, they all do it, and they're already doing these things. I would just like to, I feel like a lot of people are already applying microdosing to performance contexts and sports, but there's no hard research to back it up yet. And so It's harder to get people on board, more and more people. And that's what I kind of want to do is put that hard data to it so that, people can say, yeah, I'm doing this and look why. This is why I'm doing it. My performance go through the roof.
Yeah. And would these be pretty subjective measures, or would you actually maybe be timing, say, a reaction time, or would it just be like the pre and post measure of like, how did you think you reacted to that?
So I would like to do both. I'd like to have the subjective measures from the athletes themselves. But my jiu-jitsu master, I'm not going to name his name, but he's one of the top jiu-jitsu artists in the world. He is on board with the benefits of psychedelics, and to have an objective measure as well. Maybe invite him up from Brazil to just come observe these research sessions and give his objective point of view of who's performing better, who's reacting faster, from an objective master of the sport. But also, there's a lot of great neurofeedback and biofeedback technology out there, so we can have these athletes hooked up with biofeedback hair nets to be taking measures of their brain function while they're performing. We can put sensors on certain muscle groups to see if the fast twitch muscle fibers or slow twitch muscle fibers are firing faster or slower. Identifying greater control and greater eye-hand coordination, all sorts of things. Another thing I noticed in my own training is a much greater threshold for pain, which is advantageous in combat sports, obviously. I definitely like to get subjective and objective measures and do my best to control for the variables, which is going to be the most challenging piece of a research study like this, only because jiu-jitsu is so dynamic and every single practitioner has his own style. You don't, everybody learns the same moves, but everybody puts them together in their own way. So controlling for that stuff is going to be difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say, what kind of variables would you look for? Like length of time that somebody's trained, their strength, their speed, I guess the style. I mean, yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of different variables in there that could, yeah.
So true, and what they ate for breakfast and who they're sparring against this time and who they just sparred against, because each time you spar, you're more tired because you had just had a match. So controlling for what order of opponents and who they go against and in what order and who's going to be on these microdoses and but like I said, I have a pretty good substantial list of jiu-jitsu black belts who would more than happily volunteer for something like this.
So there was a recent Tim Ferriss had this TV show called Tim Ferriss Experiment, where he would try to learn something really quickly, and he had one episode where he was trying to learn a single jiu-jitsu move, not anything like, he's not learning the whole format or anything. And the concept was to get some sort of armbar on this like a blue, I think a black belt or something. So, obviously super hard, right? But it was one move out of infinite moves. And he did it in about 6 days. One success over the course of 6 days. So it'd be interesting to take a bunch of college kids, like 20-year-olds or something. And, well, maybe they have to be 21. I don't know. But, and, one set would be microdose, the other wouldn't be. And, same breakfast. And you just see how long it takes them to do this single move. That might, I don't know, simplify the process a little bit. But if you haven't seen that one, Shay, I think that's really worth checking out. Tim Ferriss Experiment with the jiu-jitsu guy in New York. I don't think it was one of the Gracies, but it was some big name in New York.
Okay. Is that on like Netflix or Hulu or something?
You might have to scoop up the episode on iTunes. I don't think it's on any of the streaming services.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a weird show because he did all sorts of performance-enhancing drugs and sleeping with certain enzymes that boosted memory retention and consolidation stuff. Is super crazy. But he did it. So I think it's very worthy. I wouldn't be surprised if you could get some sort of backing from some university coaches. Like D1, D2 coaches would say, yeah, I think that's not a bad idea to throw, I don't know, $10,000 at that each school. So you might be able to get some sort of research pool from that. I don't really know how sports funding goes for psychology research or sports performance research, but I know that one of the top neurofeedback trainers got hired by Canada in this huge push for the Vancouver Olympics that gave them like the most golds that year. So that was one part of it was neurofeedback. So people are looking for that kind of thing. Maybe China or Russia wants to do some doping for the next Olympics and they can fund the research.
Yeah.
Does seem like maybe simplifying it to like say how quickly does somebody learn a move, like a very complex advanced move might be a good way to start. Like a nice entry level type of research project just to maybe get some funding saying, listen, this might work to go bigger. I don't know.
No, it's a good idea. It's a great idea.
Lots of ideas tossed around.
There's never really an end to it. So I actually had some snowboarders this past weekend talk to me at a retreat I was running, and they said that most pros they knew about 10 years ago were heavily were like smoking a lot of pot while they were training and doing whatever. But I knew a lot of professionals back in college, and they weren't at the level that people are at now, where like you could be kind of slower then, but now you need to be extremely precise. It's like high-end gymnasts moving at extremely high speeds and with high consequences. So that there needs to be something there to dial in mental performance like at a higher level than I think marijuana could do.
Have you ever came across like any of those articles about microdosing cannabis?
I came across one, I think recently about microdosing edibles. But not about smoked cannabis. I found, just like with microdosing psychedelics, but, just smoking cannabis before jiu-jitsu session, is great. A big part of athletics in general is, you have to find the right level of arousal. You can't be too amped up. You're going to make mistakes, and you can't be too relaxed or you're going to make mistakes. And that's usually where injuries happen too. So you have to find this optimal zone of functioning is what it's called, and your optimal state of arousal. And for me, cannabis really puts me in that zone where I step on the mat and I'm calm already. My mind is calm. I'm not taking things personally. If a lower belt is tapping me out or something, I feel like I'm moving more smoothly. My joints feel more limber, not stiff. So even cannabis is, that's almost a daily thing for training. I've actually read some studies about how, cannabis, when smoked anyway, can help to open up the lung capacity in the bronchial tube. So I find the smoking right before a run, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I can breathe so much better, so much more deeply if I smoke cannabis before a run. And same with jiu-jitsu, very intense wrestling, grappling type sport. You're breathing really heavy, and if you can control your breath, then you're safe. So having that extra little boost for my lung capacity, I've found has been extremely beneficial.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've definitely had some interesting flow states with like just small amounts of cannabis. And I find that very helpful for getting out of my own way of not maybe over analyzing things and just kind of going with it. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What about your own personal experience with this? Would you want to dive into that at all? Of like, what's your microdose? You've done some microdosing in martial arts, and what's that like, or what's your dose like? And
yeah, sure. So I've microdosed in both training and competition. In training, I microdosed during jiu-jitsu training. I've also microdosed during our MMA sparring. And my dose is usually around 10 to 15 micrograms. It's a little more difficult to measure at that small dose, but it's definitely subperceptual. I may feel a little euphoric, a little happier than normal, but besides that, I don't notice much going into the training. And what I've experienced in my training, like I said, are the things that I'd like to study. So, during the stand-up sparring, the MMA sparring, I can see punches coming for what seems like 30 seconds, and I have plenty of time to react to them. Whereas, if you go in there without a microdose, things are moving at you much faster, it seems like. And it, it helps with the mental strategy. It helps, like you said, when you're in the flow state, you're just trusting, you're just feeling, you're not thinking. If you think in these sports, you're already a step behind. So the moment you're starting to think about your next move, that's when you're getting punched in the face. So you really need to stop the thought process as much as possible once you learn the movements and just trust. And that's really been my experience in training, especially. I did compete last year with a microdose, and at that time I entered 2 divisions that I had never been in before. Both divisions were 1 weight class above my normal weight. So I weighed in at the weight class before, but nobody showed up for that weight class, so they bumped me up to the higher weight class. I was also in a more advanced bracket than my skill level. So as a purple belt, I was going against brown belts. I was in the advanced no gi division, which I'd never done before. And on the microdose, I think I took a silver and a bronze medal in those.
Wow.
So, I was not freaked out at all about getting on the mats with more advanced people. I almost felt like, I could sense them easier. I could sense their energy and play off of that. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. I was in a flow state all day long.
And was that the same day you microdosed, or was that days later?
The same day. I microdosed the day of the competition.
Oh, that's fascinating.
How long beforehand?
We got there anticipating that we'd have about 2 hours to warm up, but when we got there, they started calling our divisions. So I think I took it 45 minutes before my first match.
Okay.
So just enough time to kick in.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I can't believe I still haven't microdosed. That's got to be on my radar sooner than later, I guess. Being in the software world, it seems like it makes a lot of sense, and having to negotiate a lot of really complex things. Like I know everybody in their jobs has to do some really complex things, but in software, it's just there's so much soft skill to everything. Not as a programmer myself, but more as like dealing with interpersonal stuff and stuff between different companies. It's like constantly have to be a diplomat, and I think there could be some really interesting stuff there with microdosing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you see the breakthroughs that happen in that software industry, partially due to microdoses. I get to wondering what sort of benefits may microdosing have at NASA? What about these top scientists who are creating technologies that may take us to other planets, but just can't figure out light speed travel? Like, give them some microdose and see what they can come up with. great mathematicians coming out with, the mathematics of the universe, philosophers, teachers, I think everybody could benefit from it in some way.
What do you think the difference is between maybe doing microdosing, say we're in the creativity realm, trying to solve a problem, like microdosing versus a full dose? Like, do you think maybe would a full dose have more creativity involved, or would the microdose of extended, taking days off, this and that, would that get you more in a flow state, you think, versus maybe just going full in, having a download of something, and then trying to integrate it?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer, but I would think that on a high dose, you might get just sudden flashes of brilliance, maybe think of a solution to a problem that you had given up on 10 years ago, or think of a brand new problem and then the solution right afterwards. Whereas on a lower, like a microdose, I think it may be more beneficial for working through more complex problems that maybe you already have laid out, but you're just caught up on one little aspect. So it may help you to approach it from a different angle or think about it in a different way. Whereas if you try to do that on a high dose, you might get lost, or you might get sidetracked into something else. That's what I would anticipate. I mean, what do you guys think?
I don't know. I think about this stuff all the time, because you have Steve Jobs talk about his experiences. I'm sure they weren't microdoses. Kary Mullis with RNA, the replication of DNA or whatever that process is. He really said his experiences with LSD helped him kind of come up with that in a sense. And then, you have that off-written interview with Francis Crick, who discovered DNA. I mean, no, you don't know if it's a fact or a myth, but saying that his experiences with LSD really kind of opened him up to this world of exploring the double helix. And so I don't know, I go back and forth where you have, I mean, even Doc Ellis, he wasn't microdosing. He took a few tabs and did that. So I don't know, I just wonder with the microdosing craze where is there there's obviously benefit in some sense, but what is it versus, say, a normal dose?
Sure. And I think of, you bring up these names, I think of like Jimi Hendrix, probably one of my favorite guitar players of all time. I mean, he would most definitely play on higher doses. But for somebody who's just trying to learn the guitar and learn how to bend some chords, a really high dose might not produce the results that they're going for. Once they've learned, the basics of the guitar, then maybe a high dose may spur some major creativity. And I think, like Jimi Hendrix's music was spacey. It was definitely influenced by his experiences on psychedelics. But I think for learning, microdosing is probably more beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's for like the deep sea fishing. It's like an expedition. You're probably going to get something for real from the microdose, at least at lifted mood at the very minimum. And with the higher dose, if you're not doing it therapeutically, you're doing it for like a particular purpose. So you put like 30 guys. So I don't know if you caught the intro for the last episode we did with you, Shane, but I kind of mentioned the extended state DMT stuff Daniel is getting into. And I was like, what happens when, this is a side thought I had after that. What happens when you get 30 NASA engineers in the room at the same time, or some quantum physicists or whatever are there still rocket scientists? There must be.
Yeah.
But so you get 20 of those guys in the room doing extended state DMT research, and what if one of them has this idea that brings us to the next galaxy in like a year or something? Like maybe you have to roll the dice like that. It's kind of like
Right.
moonshot, like Google. There's this division in Google. It's all moonshots. It's like most of the projects fail, but once in a while they get huge wins. And it's kind of like that. It's the same way Buckminster Fuller used to say everybody should get a full income to be creative all the time. Because once in a while you're going to have enormous wins, and it's going to way outweigh the cost.
Right.
It's a interesting argument. I don't know where it goes. Obviously, we don't know anything. It's just speculation. But it's or you have 500 people in a building microdosing. Maybe you get a similar breakthrough every single day. You never know.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Yeah, definitely.
It's same thing with like life extension, solving cancer, carbon issue, energy production, all that stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, I know you mentioned earlier about how LSD in the brain may prevent chronic diseases, things like that in older age. And I feel like from what I've read, my all-time favorite book is called The Intention Experiment by Lynn McTaggart. And what she does is she outlines in her book really the true power, some of the true powers of the mind, and backs it all up with peer-reviewed articles in her work. And a lot of the stuff has to do with how we are all connected, and how human beings can influence plants, and how plants have fear responses and consciousness responses. Just if a human being is thinking of harming a plant, that it has a very physical reaction to that. She also goes into spontaneous remission and the healing of the body, and using intention and mindfulness to heal yourself through visualizing, breaking up the cancer or breaking up whatever ailment you're dealing with. I feel like that's another avenue that hasn't really been explored with psychedelics, and how that may enhance our ability to heal ourselves by being able to tap into these higher states of consciousness, and then from that state of consciousness, dive right back into the body and do some deep scrubbing. Scrub out the toxins, scrub out the damage that's been done by trauma or injury or cancer or disease or anything like that. Being able to spontaneously heal yourself with the power of your mind. I'm a big believer that we have these skills innately as human beings, but we've kind of lost touch with those skill sets. A lot of spiritual practitioners say that they can, heal others and heal themselves, and there's been documented cases of this. I feel like everybody, again, has these potentials. Psychedelics just may be one avenue into enhancing our ability to heal ourselves, instead of relying on these medicines that just put bandages on the problem. The prescription industry.
Yeah, being a clinician and having some traditional training, I'm coming back to this getting out of your own way thing again. But okay, so I have an undergrad in transpersonal psychology. Now I'm studying somatic psychology. I've had a lot of strange, extraordinary experiences over my life, and I try to, sometimes I believe we can heal ourselves. And then there's the other time where I'm stuck in the traditional world, and then how do you actually, because your beliefs really impact that. And so, how do you balance between that? And I think it's a question that we have to ask ourselves, with the science and spirituality kind of mixing in. How do you step out of your own way to actually, if we can heal ourselves, to actually believe in that, but also approach it with a really rational mind and kind of analyze it in a way?
Yeah, well, I think that belief piece is the key component. You have to believe in it, or it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I love this woman's book, The Intention Experiment, is because she talks about these high-minded concepts that you'd read and you'd be like, no way, that's not possible. But then she backs it up with just countless studies, and there's the reference section in the back of the book is immense. And so people can go look up these individual studies and find out that these things really do happen. And there's some science backing up these, what I would say, people would consider them more spiritual concepts. Healing yourself with your mind and your beliefs is largely thought of as a spiritual or faith-based concept. So backing it up with science and approaching it, knowing that you're talking to a scientifically minded audience and giving them the evidence that they want. That's what at least helped me truly believe and buy into this. Was approaching it at first from a scientific point of view, and then getting the proof that I was seeking.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
So that was really interesting when you said use at sporting events, at actual tournaments or whatever. Was it a tournament? So you had like multiple rounds?
Yeah, I think I had about 16 fights that day.
Jeez. That sounds a little hard. Is that like training? Yeah. I imagine it's like, okay, you already ran 4 different 5Ks today. Let's go to your 10th. Like, and I understand fighting is a lot harder than running, but I don't know. Maybe it's similar at the higher ends of the running world. But I've never been so tired as when I've like fought somebody. It's unbelievable. So I've been reading this book since we last spoke called The Body Keeps Score. And there's all this stuff in there about the body keeping track of traumas, either those earned later in life or you grew up with them, and how doing stuff in your body, like fighting or yoga or qigong or even just breathing, can really help release a lot of that trauma. And since the last time we spoke, Shane, I'm thinking, okay, it's almost obvious now that if you could handle jiu-jitsu, like if your trauma wasn't so bad that you can handle being on the mat for a while, that it really would help people with trauma quite a bit. And I almost don't even know that we need to do the study unless you want to get insurance to pay for it. But it's this fascinating thing. Like, I feel like veteran groups should almost have their own little like peer support jiu-jitsu clubs where they don't necessarily have to go to a real gym. They just kind of fight on their own or something. I don't know. I came up with all these ideas, and then you would add microdosing on top of that, and perhaps you would even get those benefits sooner.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last podcast, but my school, the gym that I train at, we do a veterans only jiu-jitsu and MMA class every Saturday. So it's vets only, and then the instructors. I'm one of the coaches for the program, and so we do a lot of trauma work through exposure. And trauma is stored in the mind, it's stored in the brain, but it's stored in every single cell in your body. Yeah. Your cells really do have this capacity for memory, and they remember the traumas that you go through. And that's why sometimes, when you re-experience trauma, or when people have panic attacks and they don't know where it comes from, part of it comes from this memory that the cells have. And when they get triggered, they're their own independent organisms that make up our collection of cells. We like to think of ourselves as, I am this one being, but really, we're billions and billions of separate civilizations living together and communicating with efficiency that we can't even fathom. And there's got to be a way for us to take control over that large community, that system, and work in better communion with it so that we can heal ourselves more quickly. I feel like psychedelics help already. They help you tap into and connect with yourself on that cellular level. And you're right, you need to break up that trauma. You need to have your cells re-experience it, but then have an experience where you re-experience the trauma and come out the other end feeling like, okay, I can survive this. I'm okay. I'm alive. everything's just fine, and that's what happens every day on the jiu-jitsu mat. You're literally in situations where you're getting choked unconscious. And if that were to happen on the street, I mean, you could lose your life. So you're recreating these life and death situations for these people, and then teaching them that, you're okay. If you can get out of this, you can get out of anything in life. If you can stay relaxed and calm and think your way out of a life or death situation 20 times a day during jiu-jitsu practice, every day of the week, I guarantee you're going to be able to handle yourself better at work, with coworkers better, with your spouse better. You're going to have less road rage. You're just going to have much greater capacity to handle the anxieties of everyday life.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's something too about maybe people with trauma feeling really closed off and closed down, and also kind of building that confidence back up that, the world might be dangerous, but now I'm equipped to kind of handle that. At least that's what I get out of that when I think about trying to build strength and engage in a martial arts. It's like trying to build that confidence back up that, hey, the world's is kind of a safe place, and I can live in it without just going around kind of closing down and constantly being scared to engage in the world. Yeah,
this trauma really affects these guys pretty intensely.
Cool. Yeah. So how are we doing on time here? We're at about an hour and 5 minutes. Cool. So Shane, anything that we didn't cover yet that you want to jump into? Or
well, I know you guys wanted to briefly touch on integration.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So what questions do you have about that?
Well, so how does it look in the peyote world? Like, so you finish your ceremony and there's still stuff happening for you, obviously for the next few days. Earlier you told us it might be up to a year after your session that it's still working on you in a way. So how do you work with that material or do integration there?
Yeah, so the way that I've experienced it is we have a pre-integration meeting as a group. We talk about individual intentions, shared intentions, preparing people, letting them know what the ceremony structure is going to be like, what they can expect to feel from the medicine, what sort of physiological or cognitive side effects they can expect to experience, so that they're not so taken aback when it's working on you. So there's definitely some pre-integration, and then after the ceremony. Usually the all-night teepee ceremony is followed by a 2-hour sweat lodge in total pitch black, about 150 degrees. I know it feels a lot hotter than that, but that's part of the integration, part of the cleansing of the toxins as well. So I do my ceremonies about 5-hour drive away. So I have a 5-hour drive coming home. And a lot of my integration happens just up in my mind during that process, which is usually followed up by, a week of contemplation and meditation that I do. And then we meet again as a group, usually for a post-ceremony integration where people can talk about what's come up for them in the past week, what the experience was like, what it's meant in their community, and what they brought home with them, what sort of influences it's had on their relationship, and to kind of get some answers for questions that they may have had that they can't quite figure out. What is the most profound piece of the integration for me with the peyote in particular is how long the medicine works on me. And from what I've heard from the shaman that I work with, it works this way on most people as well. And that is that, the medicine effects, the visual effects, the somatic effects, they tend to wear off within 24 hours after the ceremony. But the metaphysical healing that is going on unfolds over 6 months to a year after your ceremony. So, you go home, and the first 6 months after a peyote ceremony, you may start to notice that there's big shifts going on in your life. A lot of things start shifting for no apparent reason, and usually for the better. So things will shift in your relationship. You may change jobs into a better position. You may, find a new house or buy a new house. Just big changes start to happen on a metaphysical level, and kind of out of your control. And it's kind of fun to watch unfold, as long as you have this awareness that, this isn't necessarily me making these changes, but it may have something to do with the medicine. Mm-hmm. So I tend to go for a peyote ceremony once every 6 months or so, just because I like to have that feeling in my life that changes are being made, that things are progressing, that I'm moving always towards a higher version of myself. And so the integration with peyote is much longer, I find, than with other medicines. Ayahuasca was also fairly long for me, maybe a month or two after my ayahuasca ceremonies is still unpacking things. But for me, LSD and mushrooms, I'm usually pretty through with my integration within the first couple weeks after those experiences. I feel like I have more experience with those, and so I can put things into practice much more easy. And that's what I find is the most important piece of integration is not just taking insights back with you, but you have to have an action component to the integration. You can't just have these profound insights and keep them to yourself. You have to have these profound insights and then figure out how to apply them to your life for positive change. And that's where I think a lot of people fall short, is they come out of these experiences, whether it's recreational or ceremonial, and they may journal about it, or they may just keep it to themselves, but they don't start making changes. They don't learn from their experience. They don't integrate it into the fabric of their life. And I think you can achieve so much more through these experiences if you search for those. If you search for those avenues to make these applications and these changes, and you'll be amazed at what can happen in 6 months. I tell you what, I never would have thought I would have been where I am now 6 months ago.
We always say after breath work, don't make any drastic changes within 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't really make these changes, but things are just happen in my life without.
Yeah, they unfold.
Yeah, they unfold, and that's why I think it's on a different level than what you're used to experiencing.
That was wonderful advice. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had similar experiences of breathwork where I had to drive really far to get to the place we did it. So it'd be like, this meditative thing and trying to create that meditative space for the next few weeks. So I could identify with a lot of what you were laying out there. It was really, really cool to hear. It's kind of interdisciplinary, but also interesting about the, LSD, easier to integrate for the most part. Well, I would say that's true on the whole, largely speaking. I'm sure there's some people that have a really hard time integrating it. What's that syndrome called? Persistent.
HPPD, hallucination, persistent perception disorder, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. We're trying to figure more out about that.
That's definitely on the far end of the negative consequence spectrum for sure. In my own integration work that I do with clients who need help integrating, particularly with clients who have trouble integrating their experiences, most of the time it's only because they stopped their process. Yeah. So in the midst of their psychedelic experience, while they're doing shadow work or while they're doing really hard work, they did something to distract themselves away from it, or they escaped from that shadow work by stimulating themselves with something happy. Something I learned in the Stan Groff workshop and what he talked about in his breath work, I applied to my integration work with psychedelics, and that is, if you're going to properly integrate traumas and negative feelings and get rid of those for good long term, you need to fully experience them. So when they come up for you in psychedelic experiences, you shouldn't shy away from those, but you should approach those with excitement. Like, oh, here we go. Now I finally get to let go of this trauma. It's going to be really scary, but I'm not going to feel it as powerfully afterwards. So that's what I try and do in my own shadow work, is that when anything like that comes up, I get a smile on my face, and I when I turn towards those fears and do that work, I see it as a challenge and not as a burden, that I have to do. I see it as an obstacle that I'm going to overcome. It's not a question in my mind anymore, because I've seen the benefits of fully going through the cycle of trauma and releasing it, really getting some closure for what was cut short during the traumatic experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Body keeps score, even if you disassociate. Everything keeps track of everything. Yep. I really like that kind of push. This older guy we had on, I think it's not Tom Roberts. Was it PhD Tom Roberts out of like the
Tom Roberts,
Midwest? Yeah. This idea of just kind of eliminating the individual words mind and body when talking about this stuff, and just always saying mind body, because we don't know where the line is.
Sure.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Cool. So Shane, can you plug your website one more time?
Sure. It's www.mind-ops.com. So it's mindops.com. And your listeners can connect with me through that website. That's also where I have kind of a description of all the different clinical work that I do. So I look forward to speaking with you guys in the future, and as well with the listeners that have already reached out, and to the ones that I hope to talk to in the future.
All right, Shane, thanks again for joining us, and looking forward to talking to you again.
All right, thanks, guys.
Take care.